What is up, everyone? Welcome back to the Matthew Amos podcast. I have another guest today, a really good friend that I am just really excited for to have. It's kind of been really spirit-led, God-led, and talking with Ken. I've met Ken through, if you don't know what it is, a life group. It's something that happens at a church called Freedom Church in Chatsworth, and it's a pretty large church. They probably have thousands of members. And so they do this thing called life groups where they invite you to be into smaller groups where you can get more personal, learn about each other. And we've been a part and blessed to be a part of a group with Charles Corona. And he has a great men's group that I met Ken through. And we've known each other for just a couple of months now.
Mm-hmm.
And I just saw something, a topic that just, I knew God has given him a lot of wisdom. And it's a topic that, not enough men, including myself, just know how to deal with. I won't even say we're not talking about it. We just don't know how to deal with. So, but before I get all the way over there, I just want to introduce my really good friend, Ken.
Thank you, Matthew. Appreciate it. I'm Ken Jones. I'm just a beloved son of God who has been on a journey with God over many years. So we were talking a little bit, and I was telling Matthew that God has been sending me people lately who are grieving.
Yeah.
And so maybe you who are listening is somebody who is grieving. And so if you are, I welcome you to this conversation. And you are right that especially men don't grieve well.
Yeah.
So we'll talk a little bit about that, but men don't grieve very well at all. We like to think that we're fine, everything is okay, and if I'm experiencing pain, then I must be doing it wrong. And so we don't like to tell people about that because we don't like to have those feelings like I'm doing it all wrong or I must be failing.
Yeah.
Which is why I'm having all this pain. And if I was really more of a Christian, everything would be a lot better.
Mm-hmm.
But probably the easiest way for me to do it is just to explain the story.
Sure, go for
Okay.
it. Yeah.
So when I was 24, I joined the club that nobody wants to join, which is the Grief Club. My life was already pretty rough at the time. I'd moved home with my parents. I'd been there for about 6 months. I'd started going to counseling. I was really kind of at a low point where I had come to the final conclusion that I just couldn't be fake anymore. I couldn't pretend anymore. And then my younger brother died in a car accident.
Wow.
Very sudden. He was going to his prom. He went to his prom, went out with some friends, and the next morning he was coming home. And on the way home, he tried to pass a car, and he hit the other car head on as he was trying to pass. So very suddenly, my younger brother, the youngest of 5, was gone, and I was thrown into grief. I'd like to tell you that that I did it all really well. I can't tell you that, but what I can tell you is that I was just at such a low point that I couldn't fake it, and I chose not to fake it. I'm not going to pretend I'm okay if I'm not okay, and I was not okay most of the time. I just couldn't fake it, and that was actually a good strategy for me to just not fake it. To be, I just grieved when it came up. I wasn't going to be afraid of it because for me, the hardest thing was, I just didn't have the strength to put on the face and go, oh, I'm fine. Everything's good.
Yeah, it hurt too much.
Yeah.
Yeah. Tell me a little bit more. I'm sorry. Well, first, I've heard this story before, but I'm still, and this is probably the most detail I've heard. And I'm grateful that we get the chance to kind of have more time and more in-depth talk about the details. So you mentioned you were already finding yourself in a place where you're starting to just kind of be open more, find healing. And this is before your brother passes away. You're the baby of the family. And where are you in?
I'm number 2.
Number 2. Okay.
So I got an older sister, then it's myself, then I've got 2 younger sisters, and then my brother was about 6.5 years younger than me.
Okay.
So there was definitely a family dynamic there as well, where he and I were the only 2 boys in a very feminine family.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And so there were a lot of times when it's like, let's get out of here. Let's just go play basketball. And so when things would kind of get, they'd be my sisters and my mom would be all up in a roar about something. Like, let's just go out and play basketball. So he was that confident that I would take. And there was also a part of the relationship where he was also like a son to me, because I taught him how to play basketball. I taught him how to play football. I coached some of his teams. I taught him how to shave.
Wow.
I taught him how to drive. So there was a lot of fatherly things that kind of happened there too. So it was, there was a lot of family dynamic that changed when he died. That made it difficult. But like I said, I just chose, I'm not going to fake it.
Yeah.
I'm not going to pretend I'm okay. I'm going to be however I'm going to be. And so that led me down a path where God could really work with me, I think.
What do you think was it that was behind that I'm not going to fake it? Or how did you know what faking it was? Or
Because I'd been faking it in a lot of other things in my life.
Okay.
I'd grown up in that traditional Christian household where there was a lot of talk about the Bible, but you never talked about anything beyond that. It was, do you know the verse? Do you know this? Do you know that? And then the idea is that if you knew the Bible, that your life would be all good.
Right.
My relationships weren't good. My life wasn't good. And so I was at a place where I really wanted to have more real relationships and not be the pretend good Christian that everybody always thought that I was. So that's where I was. And then you throw grief on top of that. And I just didn't have the strength to fake it, to pretend that everything was okay, to pretend that I had it all handled and everything was good. And I was doing great. It was all okay. Because there is a tendency to want to do that as a Christian. You want to, well, if I'm a Christian, then God's working in my life. And so things should be good.
Right. That makes sense. I mean, I find correlation to that when people are maybe suffering from like illness, like, that they're maybe on the verge of dying from an illness. And it's like, well, I'm just going to pray for them and like just have faith. And there's nothing sad here because nothing bad's going to happen because God has it in control.
Right.
And it's not that we're losing faith, but also I think holding that tension of it's still very sad. I'm scared.
Yeah.
But also I am holding on to faith. So, and we talked a little bit about this the other night in our men's group about how like the Psalms are a very good example of that. And I just hear you kind of, something in you clicked though. Something in you just was like, I don't know what the other side is, but I'm done with whatever this is because it's not serving me any dividends.
I couldn't be fake anymore. I couldn't pretend that it was all okay. And so, which was good. It served me well in that season.
Yeah.
Right after my brother died, his best friend was going to be walking in graduation with my brother. Oh. And so he was going to have to walk alone. So he asked my dad if he would walk with him in graduation. And my dad said, no, I can't do it. And he asked me, and God gave me enough grace that I could. And it was really interesting because God said, do it for him. And so I was able to do it for this friend. So he didn't have to walk alone. And it really wasn't as difficult as I thought it was going to be, but I was able to do it for him. So I walked in my high school graduation twice. It's a very odd occurrence and something I would not recommend, but, and then it was probably 2 weeks after that where I think I had probably one of the biggest turns in really what was going to be my grief story is that I went to an event where nobody knew me. And it was really nice. It was really wonderful.
No expectations, yeah.
Well, because everybody who knew me knew, oh, this, he just lost his brother, so he's really... I see. And so they would treat you weird.
Right.
Oh, they'd want to ask you how you are, but they couldn't ask you that. And like, oh, the weather's good today. And it was just awkward. It was really awkward. And so here were some people who didn't know me at all, didn't know I was grieving, treated me really normal. And I had a fun evening. And I got back in my car after that. And the first thing that popped in my mind is I am such a horrible person. Because here it is 2 weeks after my brother died, and I'm already having fun and pretending like he didn't even exist. And I thought, that's just terrible. What a terrible person I am. And, how could I ever do this? I won't do that again. And then I had a conversation with the Lord in the car. And so the way I have conversations with the Lord is an idea pops into my head that I know is not from me. So the idea was, or the question was, so where do you think your brother is? So I'm in the car and I'm again beating myself up for being such a terrible person, but I'll play. God, I think he's with you.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you think he's better off? Like, well, yes, God, I do. I think he's better off with you than he is when he was here. Okay. So who are you sad for? That would be me. And that was the answer. And what he was doing in that moment was he was releasing me from all the false guilt. And what I was experiencing in the car was all the false guilt. Is that I should behave in this way because, it shows that that I didn't love my brother, or it shows I didn't care about my brother, or I should do this because he would want this or he would want that. And what he was saying is, no, your brother's okay. You're the one going through the adjustment. And so it's really your grief that you're dealing with. And what that did in that moment was it freed me from all the false guilt that comes along with grieving. And most of the grieving, a lot of grieving is false guilt, is feeling bad because you should be doing this because your brother, he would have wanted that,
right,
or he would have liked that, or I should do this because that shows how much I care. And it's just all this guilt instead of really realizing, I'm doing it because I'm sad. And I'm doing it because I'm going to miss him and he's not going to be there at Thanksgiving and Christmas. And holidays are really important. He's not going to be there for the holidays. He's not going to be there when I get married. He's not going to know my kids. Those were the things that I was grieving, but I wasn't grieving that he wasn't okay, because I really did have faith that he was with God and that he was okay and that he was better off. It was me that was suffering because now the family dynamic had changed. Now I was the only son. More pressure was put on me as an only son, and I didn't have that comrade who'd, hey, come on, let's go play basketball, let's get out of here. I didn't have that person to do that, and so a lot of those things, those relationships changed. My whole family was grieving, and again, it wasn't what you expected. I just naturally assumed that God is good. God's going to take care of my brother, and that my younger brother is going to outlive me.
Right.
I didn't expect to outlive him by, already, 40 years I've outlived my brother.
Wow.
So, but that was really the start of healing. That was the start of being more free, because then it put me in places where I could, whenever I grieved, I knew it was my grief. Mm-hmm. And I knew it was about me. And so I could handle that because I was all about me.
Yeah.
And I never felt the false guilt, or when it would come, I could just push it away like that. No, my brother's okay. I don't need to do this for him. I don't need to do that because he would have wanted it. That's not really an important thing, mm-hmm, because he's better off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't mean to cut you off. It's just what I hear you like, what kind of standing out to me, and we do this in so many other ways, but it sounds like it's so powerful and so convincing in a situation like that, is that it's a coping mechanism, mm-hmm, and a really, really honorable and a really effective one that a lot of us will probably do, and nobody would question it or even call it a coping mechanism, right? Is that we are deflecting our own pain and our own grief, mm-hmm, right? And saying it should be for this other person that passed away, when we're the ones that's really hurting, and we're kind of running away from our own grief, because we need to be sad for them, but not sad for us. And until you realize that, then you started your healing journey, right?
Because I didn't need to be sad for him because he was okay. Yeah, he was better off. Mm-hmm. I was sad for me because I was missing him. Mm-hmm. And I was having to readjust my future plans, because even though God doesn't promise us that, we naturally look to the future and we think, oh, I'm going to do this, and my brother will live close by, and he'll have kids, and they'll be my nephews and nieces, and I'll be at his wedding. You naturally kind of project those things. We all do that.
Yeah, of course.
And so all that view of the future was now changed to that he wasn't going to be there for all those things. And that was the part that I was adjusting to. And as I adjusted that plan, that was grieving. That was a loss, because I was counting on these things that were not going to come to pass. But again, it wasn't entirely terrible, because he was okay. The natural thing is, oh, well, he missed out on this and he missed out on that. It's like, he's fine. He's fine. He really is. And I was convinced of that. And so I could grieve and just deal with my pain and my, and then the pain of my family. And everybody did it a little bit differently. My parents tried to just get busy and avoid it. And so their pain took a lot longer to go through. And so I grieved whenever things came up, and you kind of had expectations, and none of my expectations were right. They were all pretty wrong, because my thought was, okay, this first Christmas and Thanksgiving were really hard.
Right.
The next ones are going to be a little bit better. And sometimes they were, and sometimes they weren't. Sometimes they were worse. Because you kind of thought it was going to be like this nice even path, that I'm just taking these steps and I'm going to get to the place of where I'm good.
Point A to point B.
Yeah, and it wasn't like that. Sometimes you were doing really well, and then I'm not doing well at all. Or this year was easier, was better, and then the next year was like really difficult and hard. And so there wasn't this nice easy cadence of you're walking up the grassy slope. It was, sometimes you're at a high, sometimes you're at a low. You're kind of all over the place. But wherever I was, I grieved, and it was my grief, and I didn't have to fake it. And it would come when it would come, and I'd have good days. And when I had a good day, I could rejoice and say, "Wow, it was a good day."
Yeah.
And that was all right. So 10 years later, I'm at a church here in Los Angeles, and they were offering a grief share class, which I recommend, by the way. Grief share is good. And a lot of churches have that kind of class. And so my church was having it, and I kind of thought, well, I wonder how I did.
Did you pass the test?
I wonder if I did okay. Did I do okay or not? Was I,
Well, you mentioned that, like, in group, like how you were going. One, because you knew it was a heavy, some heavy grief going on, and you wanted to see, am I doing this right? Right? You were like, let me check in with myself to see, just to make sure, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I kind of wanted to know, did I do okay? Are there some areas that I avoided that I should have dealt with, or, did I feel pretty good about it. I don't feel like I'm, because I decided to grieve, and I did it, right? But other stuff would continue to come up, and it was just kind of a check-in to see how I'm doing. So I took the class, and for the most part, I had really grieved. Because one of the principles that they taught about is they talked about leaning into grief, which is exactly what I did. Now, again, did I know what I was doing? No, I just didn't have the strength not to, right? But it's about leaning into grief rather than avoiding it and trying to go around it.
Yeah.
You lean in and you go through it.
Can I stop you there? So, and you've mentioned kind of that a couple of times now. I want to, if you're willing to share, like, what did that look like? Because I think for myself, I've experienced them recently. I just lost somebody, what I've shared with me. We can go into that more in a little bit, but I think oftentimes men, they feel obviously they're not separated from those occurrences of it coming on, right?
Right.
But then they don't know, like, what does leaning into it look like? Is it a safe place? Like, what does it look like after? Like, am I going to, because it feels like you're going to lose everything and you're not a man, and like,
Right.
So, yeah.
So as I taught grief, so I went into grief share. At the end of the class, the teacher handed me the materials and said, I'm moving to Texas. You're going to teach it now.
Yeah.
And I taught it for 10 years. And one of the things I struggled with was men in class, because men wouldn't come.
Yeah.
And I'd know men who just lost their wife, or they just lost somebody and they were really grieving. I'd invite them to come, and they wouldn't come. Or they'd come for one session and then they'd go. But a lot of it, I came to, I came to a good illustration that I had that I would give a lot of time, and I would say that going through grief is like physical therapy. I broke my wrist snowboarding. And when I got out of the cast after a couple months in this cast, I could move my hand just barely. And so they send you to physical therapy. You got to get that back in shape. And the first thing the physical therapist does is grab your wrist and excruciating pain.
Right.
But they were trying to get my wrist back into action. Because I like playing basketball, and if you can't do this,
this is good. Yeah.
then you've got a shot, and it's going to be ugly, right? So it was getting me back to where I could do this without thinking about it. But that was painful. And grief is leaning into it is not being afraid of the pain. Normally, when we feel pain, I must be doing it wrong.
Right.
And I back away from the pain because I'm doing it wrong. Well, not my physical therapist. She grabbed on and like, well, that hurts. Yeah, it's okay.
We're going in the right direction.
Yeah, and she kept going in the pain because
Right.
she knew that she needed to get that flexibility back into my wrist that was frozen. And so leaning into grief is not being afraid of the pain. And when the pain comes, I'm not going there. It's like, okay, this is an area we need to explore because I'm afraid of this area, or this is a tough area and I'm feeling a lot of pain when I'm going here.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to be afraid to go there. For a lot of people, it's like one of the difficult tasks of the grieving is to clean out the closet and to decide what to do with that. And so sometimes people want to have someone else do that for me. Hey, you come in and just deal with it. No, that's part of leaning into the grief, right? Is
That's
you
good.
going through the closet and deciding, do you want to keep some of these items? Do you want to donate them? Which ones do you want to donate? Which ones do you want to keep? Going through that mindfully, it's hard. That's a hard task, a really hard task, because it's bringing up all those memories and all those visuals. And, our emotions are tied to senses. And so when we see something, oh, that was his favorite, that was his favorite shirt. I remember him wearing that, right? All those things come up and bring up a ton of grief, but it's an important task to do to move through grief. You have to do that at some point. You don't have to do it the first week, right? But at some point, generally within that first year, you got to do that. You got to tackle that.
I can imagine a lot of people, and I'm not.
Sometimes they don't.
Yeah.
Sometimes 10 years later, that closet is still the exact same way it was.
So it's like leading to hoarding almost. I'd imagine that that's sometimes a response to people that don't grieve.
Yeah.
I'm not a therapist.
No.
I'm not an expert, but maybe some people that.
But it's a task that you need to do.
Yeah.
And again, it's a hard task. So either sometimes people, here, I'm sending a truck, I'm getting rid of it all.
Right.
Or I'm not touching any of it. I'm making it a shrine.
Right.
Neither one of those is a great response. Eventually you need to just do it and go through it. Right. And because it's painful. And so leaning in is not being afraid of the painful things. And recapturing some of the other places. Like if there was a place that you would go or that would remind you of, I used to play basketball with my brother and his friends. I still played basketball with his friends when he wasn't there. And it was a difficult thing to reclaim. But again, if you don't reclaim it, then you just kind of back away. And it was part of grieving, was to do that. And to realize I'm playing with his friends and he's not there. But it's still okay. I enjoy his friends. I enjoyed playing. It's something I still wanted to do. But you start to reclaim some of those things. A lot of people will avoid things. I'm not going back to that church. I'm not going back to that place. I'm not going to this thing because of too many memories. And again, not saying that on day one you have to go do all those things, right? You want to do those, but you want to start reclaiming those things so that you're not frozen out of, oh, I'm going to avoid all these things. I can't do these things anymore.
Can I touch on that really quick?
Sure.
Because I found myself doing that, but I wanted to do it alone. In the sense that so I love the metaphor you use with, because I've hurt my knee playing basketball before. I something cracked.
Yeah.
Like I was playing basketball outdoors mostly during like the 2 years of COVID. too much outdoor basketball, cracked my knee. And yeah, I've had to stretch it. It's still, and I have to force through that pain, and it helps. And so what I gather from you saying that, and what kind of visual to me is like, in our brain, if we don't work through that pain, we're not going to be able to emotionally be present moving forward for the people that we love that are here, because we haven't repaired or gone through the physical therapy for that part of our brain, our soul. And it's always going to be scarred, and we're going to be playing basketball, right, or playing life with that broken piece, not as well as we used to. And I found
or avoiding or not playing at all. Right? A lot of people check themselves out because it's too painful. So, well, I'm not going here. I'm not doing these things anymore. I'm not doing those things anymore. I'm giving up this. I'm giving up that. And your life shrinks because you haven't healed.
Yeah.
And the part of healing is so I could play basketball again. The part of healing is so that the things I used to do before, I can do them again. And that's the part of grieving, is going through that again, through the pain,
right,
and through the hard things, so that you can gain back life.
So I found myself doing that recently. So like I've mentioned to you, we've talked about, I lost a dear aunt, and being at her house, in her last days, and she was on hospice, and so I was there when she passed, and all those things happened. And she had like dried chiles that were from her plant that she had out in the front. And, I was given the okay to take some. And I took some, and I knew her recipe, because when she was alive, she would share recipes with me. I love to cook. And she knew this, and I would ask her certain tips. And so there was a salsa recipe, and I used her chilies. And I felt myself just naturally going towards this, right? I wasn't like, I'm going to face grief today and I'm going to make this salsa. It's just something that it felt right. It felt like I should do this, but I was aware that this could, I was going to maybe break. So I'm making the salsa, and sure enough, when I make recipes that are specific to her, like cooking in general will maybe take me there. But specifically making that salsa not too long ago, I'm listening to certain music that's helping me to cope, as like just to deal with the grief at that time. I'm cooking this salsa, and I'm just the lyrics, the salsa, I'm like starting to break down. And this is a place I want, maybe you could pick up off of, like, and my wife, hopefully she won't kill me, is that, so I'm breaking down. My wife walks in, and she's like, "Oh, are you doing that to pay tribute to you?" Like, she says something like, you're remembering your tia." And then I just get so embarrassed, right? This is on me. It's not her, because I don't know how to deal with other people seeing my emotions. I'm good with supporting people and like being strong for others. But she caught me in a really vulnerable moment, and we're still working on like being emotionally there for each other and having trust in that area. And so I got embarrassed. I got really frustrated. I was able to hold it in. It didn't create a fight, but I was really offended that she would even say anything while I'm going through this emotional moment. And I would think, like you mentioned, playing basketball with your friends, like as moments where you broke, did you have somebody or a place, or was it just God that like you felt safe to break down in those times?
Well, I think it's okay to be that way in front of people.
Yes, I'm trying to get there.
And I would encourage you to do that. Because part of my being at that place where I couldn't fake it is I didn't want to fake it around people. And so if I was having a bad day, I had a bad day, and it was in front of people. And it didn't matter that I didn't have to be alone for that. It came. I mean, I remember going to a movie with a friend several years later. And there was something in the movie, Legends of the Fall. It was about brothers.
Okay.
And there was something in the movie that all of a sudden I wasn't okay. And we got done with the movie, and he goes, "Are you okay?" And I'm like, "No." But it was okay in that moment to share that with him, because in that moment I wasn't okay. It had brought up something about relationship that made me think of my brother and think of it in a certain way, because I was the older brother. It was an older brother, and the younger brother died. And the older brother felt responsible for that. And so that brought up some feelings that I had for my younger brother. And, another false guilt is that it should have been me and not him, right? And so that came up several times, and God would deal with that when it would come up, because, you'd ask him, well, why did you take him instead of me? And God won't always tell you someone else's story.
Right.
He won't tell me why
that's
for
great.
him, but he'll talk to me for me. I'm not done with you yet. You still have things to accomplish. There's still stuff in your life that I'm still doing. So he'll tell me my story. He won't tell me, well, why was it okay for my brother's story to end? And then were you done with him? Was that, that's his story.
Yeah.
That's his story with my brother. But sometimes those things would come up, and when it would come up for me, again, just because of the place I was at, I didn't care. I didn't care who was around. I didn't care. And that was good, because it allowed me to grieve easier. Because I just decided not to be embarrassed, and I was going to.
That's beautiful.
I was going to go through it, and I didn't care if people saw.
Right.
Because it was what it was.
I think, man, it's such. One, God obviously has an anointing in this area in your life, and for him to meet you in the car in that way seems to be very powerful. And God saying, because if God's telling you, hey, it's okay, and you're the one who needs to grieve it, and so him giving you that, you just knew, if God said I'm okay to cry, who are you to tell me it's not okay? So I don't know if that's kind of what your mentality was moving forward.
I knew it was about me, and I was also just at a place in my life where I didn't want to be, so again, my growing up I was always the good boy. And the good boy is, you have it together, you know the right answers. In church, when they ask you this, you know that this is the right answer. So you give the right answer, and you always, you always have that right answer. You know the Bible verses, the different things. And so that's the way my family operated. And I was at a more broken place where it's like, I can't put on that. And if I'm not okay, I've got to be able to be not okay. And so that meant being not okay in front of people. And so I was already at that place, and that was just a further demonstration of that. Because if I was not okay, it's not okay that day. The other really good thing about grief is that the reason that you are in grief is because you did love.
That's good.
It would be worse if you had no feelings. Because if you had no feelings, then maybe you didn't care, or maybe you never really had a good relationship, or you didn't have any kind of a relationship. I know there's a lot of people who struggle with that as well. It's like, well, I should be grieving more, but I'm kind of okay. I'm not having a lot of stuff come up, and that might be because there was either not as much of a relationship, or maybe you saw them go down over a period of time, and they weren't quite the same person. If you deal with someone who's been in a long illness, that's a little bit different kind of grief, because you're actually grieving the whole time they're becoming less and less them. Like if you have a grandparent that was very, vibrant and active, and then you see them become, more bedridden and more, less and less, each time you see them, they're a little bit less of them, because they're more sick, and they're not able to do all the things that made them so alive before. You're actually grieving that whole period of time. But for the most part, grief is because you cared.
Right.
And so a lot of people, after somebody dies, will say, oh, well, my solution to that is I'm not going to love as much, because then it won't hurt as much.
Right.
But when you really think about it, is that really the way you want to live? And the answer would be, I hope not. I hope not.
Yeah.
I hope that's not the way you want to live, but it's a natural inclination. That's really painful. And like, well, sometimes if a person is young and they lose a spouse, well, I'll never get married again. Well, yeah, that could hurt. But remember how wonderful the love was, and how the caring was, and people can move on, and it's not you're not betraying the person. The person's no longer there. So if you do find love again and you do get married, that's an okay place to be.
Yeah. You shared I think it's kind of on topic. If you want to go here next, I'm sure there's a bunch of tips and like aspects to this, but kind of to piggyback off of that, you mentioned how you knew somebody who their father had passed away, and then they were receiving help, from people and just things that probably their father would have taken care of, but they were rejecting it all because like almost they felt like if I do that, then I'm dishonoring, my father.
So I'm in an airport that I'm not supposed to be at. I got blown off track. I'm waiting because we're waiting out storms because there's lightning.
Oh, wow.
There's a kid just out of high school that's sitting next to me. So I strike up a conversation. And I asked him about his dad. I don't remember why I asked him about it, but I did. And he said, oh, my dad passed when I was 12. So he's like 18 now. And so then I'm like, okay, now I know why I'm sitting here next to you. Because like I said, God sometimes brings me the grieving. And so I'm like, okay. So I was just asking him about his life and what was going on. And he was telling me about several men in his life, but he was also telling me how he was kind of pushing them away. Mm. And so as I listened to him, I said, I had to ask him, so if your dad was here, would he want you to receive good things from other men, or would that be a betrayal of him? Mm. And he goes, oh, yeah, I think my dad would want me to have that. I go, okay, then why are you pushing it away? Because he was trying to be loyal to his dad, which is an honorable thing.
Right.
Right. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that, but his dad wouldn't have wanted him not to receive good things because he had a man who was trying to tutor him in finances. He had a football coach who was pouring into his life and was really taking an interest in him. And he had a brother who was trying to, help him with all sorts of different things. So he had 3 different men that were trying to, because they saw here was a young man who needs a dad. And they're trying to fill part of that role. And you're not always going to find like one person to come and be, oh, here's my new dad. Yeah. And they're going to take over everything. But God will provide a way for you. And so God was providing a way for him with these men who were finances and family and football and being tough and being a man, that these guys were wanting to pour into him, but he was rejecting them because he didn't want to be disloyal to his dad. And so I was able to just ask him, would your dad want you to have them? The answer is yes. Then take them. Because God is offering you that. He's giving you this gift. Because if your dad was here, he would give you all those good things, but he's not here. And so he can't. And so your Heavenly Father is providing them for you. You're not being disloyal to your dad by taking them. So it was just that divine moment sitting in an airport of when I wasn't supposed to be at.
Probably one of many.
Yeah. Yeah. God puts me sometimes in just these situations where I'm like, okay, I'm supposed to talk to this person about this thing. But it was a good conversation. And I got to pray for him. I got to bless him. And then I hopped on my plane and went to where I was going. Mm-hmm. So, but I think, again, a false guilt of I'm going to be disloyal to my dad if I accept fathering from anybody else. And that's not the case, because your dad would want you to have it.
Mm-hmm. Whether it's like a friend or mother or sister or like.
Because God does provide. He brings people into your life to meet some of those needs that you have from those key relationships. Mm-hmm.
What would you say are so you mentioned kind of like leaning into the grief, right? Being okay with God providing you those people in your life to kind of to support you, right? Yeah. That maybe some gaps that you have now. What would you say is another like common thing or that comes up or that you would just really, and it could be men specific or just everybody.
Men are the worst.
Okay, so keep it on men then.
Men just won't go. Men just won't go because for most of the time I think men think that if I'm hurting, I'm doing something wrong. And if I'm hurting, I should just do whatever I can to get out of the pain. And which is why I keep telling them it's physical therapy. You got to go through the pain. Mm-hmm. But men don't want to do it because it feels like failure. Yeah. If I need to go to a grief share class, that means I'm not doing well in my grief. No, it just means I need to go share that with other people so that I can go through it instead of trying to go around it.
Yeah. And we touched on that. I mentioned it earlier. and I feel like it's fitting to mention it now, how, if you are a Christian, or if not, what a believer or not, but specifically and you're familiar, and if you're not familiar, honestly, I grew up and I in a Christian home going to church, and I wasn't that familiar with the Bible. I didn't start reading the Bible really deeply until like my 30s. But in Psalms, you mentioned how you studied, and I'm currently going through the Psalms, and there is a lot of grief. And I dare to say that it is good grief, because we talked about when you are trying to, at least, even if you're just at the very start of it, if you're trying to build a relationship or you have a relationship with God and you're grieving, like you see David grieve in the Psalms, and he's like saying, I mean, right out, like, God, where are you? Like, it's not that I'm sad. It's like, it feels like you're not even here. It feels like, like almost like you're betraying me. And like, I need you now. Where are you? And you read Psalms like that. And then, as it works its way through, God shows up and he starts to rebuild his faith, but it's not without the lamenting. It's not without the grief. He doesn't just always say, God's going to get me out of this. God's going to, he's going to fight for me. God's going to, it has to. So I feel like it's part of the process. And we talked about how it could be, and I think so from what we gathered the other night, is like that's how God made us. And he doesn't want us to ditch that part. And I was reading something recent. Oh no, it wasn't something, it was a Psalm. And it said how like it reaches God's heart. And sometimes we don't think that God has a heart. He doesn't feel. He doesn't, he doesn't care if I'm sad or happy. And he just like wants me to be obedient and I'm not sinning. And for my recent journey is like, I want to feel God feeling. I want him to feel me feeling it. And like, what does God feel if I'm sad? And and then I kind of think about that. Well, what do I feel if my daughter's crying? What does that make me feel? Do I want her to be able to cry with me? I know I'm kind of like going in a circle here, but just knowing that God wants us to be honest with our emotions, because it's beautiful for him to meet us where we are, because he has a heart and he has, emotions, and like he wants to get in there with us. That's a part of the process.
There is an intimacy of trusting in God when you're willing to push in and go through grief, because you're having to trust him. You're having to trust him with my brother, that he has him. And then as your fears come up, you have to keep trusting them back to God. So as I taught the class, the Grief Share class, one of the fears that would always come up is, what if one of my kids dies? Could I handle it? And so every time that would happen, I would have to, in my mind's eye, take my kids, hand them back over to God and say, you have them. Because there is a trust of, one of the things in grief is that you come to realize that I can't control it all. I can't watch them 24/7. I can't make sure they're always protected. I can't go to them with every sleepover, every time they get in a car and go someplace, every little time they're out of my sight. And even when they're in my sight, I can't make sure that, no
keep
earthquake.
Them from every illness.
Yes, every illness. And, is there lightning today? Is there going to be an earthquake? Move to the safest spot. I can do my best.
Right.
But I'm not that good. I can't watch them for everything. And I know a lot of parents, especially now, kind of that hovering, because I think I can take care of everything, and I can't. And so every time I would start to go there, I just like, I give them back. I give them back. You have them. They're your kids. And you can watch them 24/7. You can make sure that nothing happens to them. You can make sure that if something happens to them, that they're still within, that you have them. Just like you have my brother. I mean, he didn't make it through the accident, but I know you have him.
Yeah.
And so, I would do that, and that would give me peace, because the peace would come from, I can't control it all. I know I'm not in control, and grief shows you that, because you just know you're not. Like I can't stop every illness. I can't stop every car. I can't stop every tragedy from happening. I can't keep them all within my eyesight. So I'm giving them back over to God. Honestly, it's an issue I had with my parents after my brother died, because every time I left the house, they would go,
That makes sense. Yeah.
be careful.
Right.
And really what they were telling me is, don't you die because we couldn't handle it.
Mm-hmm.
It's like,
It's a lot of pressure.
it's a lot of pressure.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, what do you want me to do? Do you want me to stay in the basement and never leave? Because you want me not to live a life because
Essentially, they'd be killing you,
they'd be killing me to
not let you
to
die.
not have your to ease their fears.
Right.
And so I had to finally tell them, Mom and Dad, I love you.
Uh-huh.
If you want to worry, it's not in the Bible to worry. It doesn't say in the Bible, worry about your children day and night.
Right.
It does not say that. But if you choose to worry, then I don't want to hear it. Don't tell me. Don't gasp every time I leave the house, because I'm going to do the best I can.
Right. Of course.
I'm not doing anything crazy. I'm not driving 110 miles an hour. I'm not taking drugs. I'm not doing other stuff. So, but I'm going to live.
Yeah.
I'm going to go see my friends. I'm going to go to work. I'm going to, play basketball. I'm going to go have fun. But don't worry, I don't want your worry, because your worry doesn't help me live.
Mm-hmm.
Your worry just adds more burden and pressure onto my life that I can't carry that for you.
Yeah.
It was a hard conversation to have with my parents, but they were actually pretty good about it. They stopped letting me know now. Did they worry? Yeah, no, they probably still worried. But that's on them.
Yeah.
Because God doesn't call us to worry. And every time I would give my kids back over to God, I wouldn't worry.
Mm-hmm.
Because I know, okay, God, they're in your hands. Yeah, you got them. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to do the best I can. If there's anything you tell me to do, I'll make sure I do it. We had a pool. I made sure they all knew how to swim. There was a gate around the pool. Eventually we took it down once they really knew how to swim.
Mm-hmm.
Right. But every time I worry, okay, God, no, I'm giving it back to you. I'm
Right.
giving it back to you. I know they know how to swim.
Using wisdom, not just
Yeah.
going completely the other way and saying, well, life doesn't matter, and if I die, I die, and so I'm
Yeah.
just going to live reckless because it all doesn't matter,
Yeah.
right? And I'm sure maybe some people have that response as well.
But I can't put 10 layers of bubble wrap around them and send them out to school like that,
Yeah, no, they'll be ridiculed.
Yeah.
You'll ruin their life.
Yeah.
Man, this is. I just am every time talking with you. I'm always amazed of just the wisdom God has given you. Because I know even from me talking in group, just your ability to listen and just see sometimes. And I think maybe that's why God kind of skipped a class for you, and it's no, you're going to be the instructor. It's because even taught me when I'm talking in our life group sometimes. And you're like, oh, what you're feeling, it's shame. And we're like, oh no, you're what you said the other day, I was rambling about a bunch of stuff, and you're like, you're a learner.
Yeah.
Wait, what did you get? Not and I kind of knew that about myself, but for you to say it, really just showed how much, just your wisdom and the much you just can be present with people.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it makes sense why God would choose you to choose such a delicate area, right? So that you've coached people through.
Well, thank you. And again, I didn't go into this God, I think I'd like to go into this grief club with you, and that would be an awesome thing to do. And, you end up on the path that God takes you, and honestly, He's been really good to me. And I think I do hear people. Mm. I think that is one of the things that He's planted in me, is that when they're talking, I hear the words, but I hear the heart. Mm-hmm. Many times of what's underneath that, because I've been there, and I've been trying to find my heart, because for years of my life it was just my head. It was not connected at all to my heart, and the process of grief and the things I went through helped me connect the head to the heart, and realize that the heart is really important in a lot that we do, and to be able to hear it in myself, and then to hear it in other people.
Yeah, sorry, I just did a quick time check, because I don't know how much of a time constraint you have. Mm-hmm. We're at 50 minutes now.
Okay.
So it's probably about like 2:03.
I think we're really close to being done, unless you have some other questions.
What would you say? Right, because we talked about, I have a family that's grieving, people that are closer to the person that passed, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I can speak to that. And I know, right, as we're going to the holidays, and I know you've mentioned, and I don't know if you have like another tip, or you just kind of want to sum it up and let's focus on men. I know people, everyone will get something from this,
Yeah.
but focus on men and what you would, in the simplest way possible, and just encouraging way to like how to encourage them to go through that process, right? How they're going to be better on the other end of it.
So what happens by going through grief, not trying to go around it, is that you get those things back. I can talk about my brother today. I can think about my brother and it not always be this terrible thing that I have to avoid.
Right.
It's
beautiful.
When we get together, so you get the memories back, because at first when you're grieving, every memory is painful, right? And so it's easy to try to just avoid all those memories. But then I'd have to pretend that my brother didn't ever live. And my brother was quite a character. He was a pesky little brother. That if he found out you didn't like something, he'd do it all the more. He had quite a personality. And you get those things back when you've gone through the grieving.
Right.
Because now I can talk about that.
Yeah.
And sometimes you saw even in this, sometimes I'm going to, the emotions are going to come up, and that's okay. Mm-hmm. And then there's other times I can talk about it and just really enjoy him. My youngest son is has a little bit of my younger brother in him, and I see that.
Okay.
But it's okay though, because
right.
I can see that in him, and I can appreciate that, and I'm not afraid of that,
right.
or I'm not like, here's an area I can't go. So by going through grief, you gain back territory.
Oh.
It would be like if you have a full house to start with, and all of a sudden I've shut myself in a corner little bathroom, and that I'm not coming out. Mm-hmm. And now I gain back, the bedroom, and then I gain back the living room and the dining room, and I gain back part of that house. And now I'm able to live fully because I've done that hard work of going through grief. I get those areas back, and I don't have to avoid them.
Yeah.
Because this is going to be painful, or that's going to be painful. You're able to gain back that ground. I can talk about my brother today. I can bring it up, and it's not this like, oh my goodness, because people get weird around you.
Yeah,
they do. They're afraid of saying the wrong thing that's going to set you off, and maybe it's going to bring tears. And so,
not me in particular, but when you're grieving,
but people, yeah. And
it
even people, like when I was playing basketball with my brother's friends, the only reason I knew them was because of my brother. Yet they were afraid to bring up his name. They wouldn't say it. And so I would have to do that. And then there'd be times when I'd have to like encourage them, like, look, only reason I know you is because of Stevie. So it's okay if you bring up his name. It helps me. Don't worry about hurting me. And I'd have to give them permission. Because otherwise they would avoid it, because they didn't know how I was. So the more I could put people at ease, it's like, oh, no, it's okay to talk about this. I like to talk about this. I need to talk about this because it helps me get through. Would help the grieving process and make the people around you more comfortable, because they don't want to set you off. And I had lots of grace for them, because I knew that before I went through grief, I would have done the same thing or worse.
Yeah.
So
yeah. Oftentimes we even have issues just saying, I'm sorry for your loss, or what do I say when I go to this funeral? Or, wow, something you said, I mean, not just one specific thing, but just what you said in an entirety of, it made me think of what better way to, we talked about honoring somebody and being stuck in like, oh, I don't want to, be sad or whatever it is, because I want to honor them. But what better way to honor the person that passed away than to get through all of your grief, right? To get healing, so that then you can talk about them and talk about all the memories, and really just continue to leave their print on the world. Yeah. Instead of leaving it stuck somewhere and you can't bring it up, right? And so they can't have that imprint on other people's lives.
And the first couple of years in our family, it was hard, because I was very actively grieving, and some others in my family were running away from the grief. And so you couldn't bring up things. It was hard to talk about those subjects. I would bring it up because that's where I was.
Mm-hmm.
And so I asked my mom and dad, "How are you? How are you doing? What's going on with you?"
Yeah.
Because those are hard conversations to have because everyone's grieving and we don't all do it the same way. I had chosen to really push through the grief. They were kind of trying to avoid it.
Yeah.
By the way, avoiding doesn't work because it's still there. You know, if I would have avoided the physical therapy on my wrist would just be frozen.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's not any better. It's not any different. You know, it's still there that needs to work its way out.
I think it's a great tip for somebody. I think sometimes, at least I feel like I could play that role, and I'm trying to work on not avoiding. But if I feel comfortable, then trying to, like you're saying, bring it up, try to help us go towards it. And I'm just saying, if anyone's in that role, you feel like, okay, I'm pushing towards it, I'm not running away from it. Then also, like, maybe, with as much love and gentleness as possible, to maybe bring it up and try to in your family without causing, a big ruckus. It sounds like that's kind of what God put you in place for your family to help do that.
Yeah. So that brings up another good point is how do you, so if you're not grieving, but somebody else is grieving, how do you deal with them? And the more that you can ask them questions about what helps you during this time. Do you want to talk about it? Does it help not to talk about it a little bit? Are there just certain times you want to talk about it? To be able to have more conversations about what's helpful for them. Is a good way to start, to not be afraid to just ask them.
Yeah.
I'm very bold because I just am. I've been through it, and so I'm not afraid of it. Like I met a guy recently, and he told me that his best friend had committed suicide, and so I asked him, "Tell me about him." Right? I want to hear about him, and so we spent probably an hour, and he just talked about.
Was he shocked, or was he just like, "I'm glad you asked"?
No, he was. Well, he was nervous.
Mm-hmm.
He was nervous because it's hard to talk about.
Yeah.
But it was good to talk about. It was good to talk about, and we could share on that. And what did he mean to you, and what was the relationship like, and what are you going through, and just to be able to talk through some of those things. And then a lot of times there's false guilt in there that I can help them get rid of the false guilt.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people think, well, I should have known. I should have, especially on a suicide, it's really hard because it's I should have known that they were thinking about that. I should have stopped them. I should have been able to, but for most people committing suicide, they don't want you to know. They're purposely hiding it from you. They're telling you that everything is fine. They're not telling you, oh, by the way, tomorrow I'm really thinking of committing suicide. So, and if they are, then you should take them seriously and try to get them as much help as possible. But
Definitely.
most of the time they don't tell you those things.
Mm-hmm.
And then the person just feels guilty. And then the question is, if you had known they were committing suicide, would you have done something? The answer always is, well, yes. So what was the problem? The problem was you didn't know, right? Same thing with my mom was really sick, and so I went there to the hospital every day. And this one day, I was just really tired, and I went home instead. And that's the day she died. Well, if you had known she was going to die that day, would you have gone? Yes,
Of course.
right.
Yeah.
So what was your problem? Your problem was that you didn't see the future, and you didn't know that was the day she was going to die, right? So that's not a question of I'm a terrible person. It's no, I just didn't know the future. I couldn't see that part of it. I did care. If I would have known that was her time, I would have dropped everything to be there. But I just don't know the future.
Right.
And we beat ourselves up for some of those things. That's not our fault. It's not our fault because we just didn't know.
Yeah.
If we had known, would we have? And that's always the question. If you would have known, Well, oh, yeah, of course. Well, then it wasn't a problem of caring.
And
It wasn't a problem that you're a bad person. It's a problem that you just don't know the future. I don't either. So,
and the logical part, right? It makes sense to help somebody get through that. But I would imagine that somebody kind of needs to say that to kind of go through it, right? Hey,
Yeah.
I do feel bad.
yeah.
But like you're saying, don't get stuck there. Like that's part of, are you saying like that's a part of leaning into it? Share that with somebody.
Yeah.
And then know that obviously you if you would have known, right?
Well, but people beat themselves up
Right.
because they just feel like I'm a terrible, well, just like me in the car. I felt like I was a terrible person because I had fun. And God was showing me that, no, I really cared a lot about my brother. And that's why I was hurting so bad. And that I didn't need to feel bad for him because he was okay.
Yeah.
You know, it's, you know, when you change the thought and you get truth, then it just sets you free.
Yeah.
And so I'm not worried about that part anymore because like, oh yeah, you're right. That's not right at all. Like, yeah, I'm not a bad person for not being there when my mother finally, you know, passed on because, you know, I was tired. Well, if I would have known that she was going to die at that moment, would I have been there? Of course I would have.
Yeah.
If I'd known my friend was going to commit suicide, would I have done anything to stop him? Of course I would. Of course. Right? So it's not a caring problem. And they beat themselves up because I'm not caring. And it's like, no, you're just not, you just don't know the future.
Right.
You know, you are very caring because you would have clearly done something.
Yeah.
And then that helps them relieve that guilt because they feel guilty about that. You know, it's on me. I should have done that. It's like, no, it's not.
Well, Ken, I know we are over an hour, or just barely. Is there anything else you want to touch on? I know you've talked about a lot, and I'll definitely put in like links you can share with me, like some good websites for people that are going through grief. I want to provide some resources for people.
I think just griefshare.org.
Okay, griefshare.org.
Yeah.
Okay.
And they have meetings at different churches. I think it was like a 10 or 12 weeks, something like that. It's video, but you share it with a group, and you talk about things, and you hang out with other people who are grieving, and you could get a chance to kind of lean in a little bit.
Did you feel going to and those places? And this is maybe me and I have no idea what that looks like. Maybe some people are like, well, I don't want to go to a place where everyone is just all sad, right? And then,
no, but people laugh again too. Again, that's part of the misconception about grief, is that when you're going through grief, you're all crying and there's no, you know, you have moments of fun and laughter in the middle of all that,
right?
And hopefully you, because you're still living.
Yeah.
You know, going through grief isn't like one long process of I'm depressed for 2 years. You know, it's a very up and down. I mean, you have your good moments and your bad moments, your good days and your bad days. You know, your days when you're really sad and your days when it's okay. So it's a mishmash of things, but it's an opportunity to push through instead of try to avoid or go around.
Yeah, and it's probably a safer place than you know, dealing with people in your life that maybe you're not sure of how they'll react to it. And I'm glad you mentioned that, because in my mind, stereotypically, I've never been to a grief share. And so I'm thinking like, man, that sounds kind of not so great. Like, I'm going to go with all these people. I'm already wrecked myself, and I got to go be wrecked with all
again,
these people.
if you think it's going to be, you know, and again, why men would not go is they would go, and then it's like, well, it made it hurt more than it hurt before, so it's clearly not working, right? It's like, no, it's physical therapy. It's going to hurt.
Yeah.
This is going to hurt more by doing this, but the idea is that you get back into life.
Yeah.
Or you can not do anything and stay out of life and become that, you know,
Cold.
I'm just going to love less. I'm going to be involved less. I'm going to put myself out there less so that I'm going to be less, you know, less able to be hurt. But now I'm living in one teeny little room of the house, and I'm closing up a lot of other doors, and my life has to shrink so that I can, you know, so I don't have to face the guilt. And my whole life is starting to shrink down instead of saying, no, I'm going to still live.
Yeah.
And and more grief will happen and things will hurt, but it'll hurt because I'm going to still love. I'm going to care about people. I'm going to continue to put myself out there. And that's a much better place to go. I think one last thing is people will say things to you as a grieving person that will really irritate the heck out of you, but you just got to give them grace. They'll say the things, well, I guess God needed another, flower in heaven, or, some such thing. And, those things aren't necessarily helping because they're just trying to avoid the
pain.
Yeah. They're trying to get you to, think about roses and daffodils and, and let's avoid, grief is painful. And it's messy. And
you're going to take us, we could keep going if you want, because you're taking us into a other topic of, right, our reactions. You touched on it a little bit of being okay with people grieving, right? Because oftentimes as a person who's dealing or around other people who are grieving, your knee-jerk reaction is to cheer them up, right? But you're saying, to just sit with them.
Well, and the other knee-jerk reaction just is that if they're crying, they're doing poorly. And so there is a change of a paradigm on that. So I've got a guy at my work who lost his wife, the love of his life, right? He's got 2 daughters that are out of high school, but he's really going through it. He thinks he's doing terrible because he's crying, and things are coming up, and he's yelling at God, and he's doing these things. I tell him, "You're doing great. You're doing really wonderful."
Blessing for him to have you.
And he's like, "I don't feel like I'm doing great." It's like, "No, you're doing great because you're not trying to hold it in."
Yeah.
He goes, "I can't." I go, "Good. You hurt because you love. That's okay." And the fact that it's messy is just the way that it is. But you're allowing the mess to be there. You're doing great. You're actually moving through it. And I told our team, who actually works for him, I said, some of you are going to think that because he cries and because he gets emotional at times, he's not doing well. I just want to let you know, he's really doing well.
I'm telling you, everyone needs a Ken in their corner.
He's really doing well. He's doing amazing.
Yeah.
And I tell him that every time. He goes, "I need to talk to you more."
I know why you and Tristan always you come to our groups Tristan just talked to you. It was this is always have your own, and I could see why. But man, wouldn't that be so amazing? And I'm so encouraged of you saying that. In a gentle way, not in you don't know what I'm feeling right now, but if somebody's crying and you're being with them, and just telling them you're doing so great. This is such a part of the process, and God wants you to, and it's because you loved, and not just it's going to be okay. Remember that one time when we all, not to say that those things don't help as well. But I've never saw that as an option of saying, man, you're so strong, and you're allowing yourself to do this, right? And you're doing great, and don't think that you're any less. And just to speak those words of truth and words of affirmation to somebody who's mourning, I never even saw that as an option.
Yeah, it's the same thing if you saw them coming out of physical therapy with sweat on their face.
Come on,
with sweat on their face, and they're like, "Oh, that was brutal," right? Hey, you're doing great.
Yeah, you would tell a professional athlete,
"You're doing great. You're doing great." You know. Why? Because that hurt a lot and you went through that pain, but that pain is
much closer.
Is getting you back into life, and that's what it takes to get back into life. So you're doing great.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Well, I don't feel particularly great. It still hurts a lot. Okay, but that's part of the process. And you're getting back into life. You're doing okay. And he's always surprised when I say it. And I say it to him every time. But it's true though. He's really doing well. Is it messy? Yes. Is it painful? Yes. Does he have sometimes false guilt? Yes. Do I tell him to stop doing the false guilt? Of course. Because sometimes he wants to blame himself. I just feel bad because it's like, if you would have known, could you have done something different? Of course. Then it's not your fault. Because you think that, I should have known everything. I should have tried this different technique, or I should have tried this. Maybe if we did this or that. And you can wreck yourself with the what ifs or the other stuff, and that's not helpful.
Yeah.
That's I mean, grief can spin. Grief can spin into the beating myself up. I'm a terrible person. And again, God saved me from that right from the very beginning. And so I know when I hear somebody saying that, I know what they're saying. I'm like, no. God doesn't want that for you, because that's not yours to carry. That's His. He's the one who knows the future. He's the one who knows, what's going to happen. He's know what could happen. He didn't share that with you, so that's not your, that's not your burden to carry. That's His.
Yeah.
Your burden to carry is just, did I love? Did I do everything that I knew to do? Did I care? Did I disobey Him in anything? Then your guilt, is not there. And people want to feel guilty sometimes because they feel bad.
Yeah. And you feel like you should, all the shoulds come back, right?
Yeah,
and you
the
start,
shoulds.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow, Ken, I'm glad we got that last little nugget out of it. Because honestly, and I knew that, and on this journey of podcasting,
Yeah.
I know I'm not an expert in
Yep.
in any of these areas.
Yeah.
But I know I'm trying to learn.
Mm-hmm.
And you've noticed I'm a learner.
Yeah.
And I've noticed that some of these things are really deep and I want to learn. And I'm going through some grieving myself, and seeing my family on Thanksgiving. So having some of these tools, especially that last one, like, because it's so awkward to not know and just avoid even people who are grieving, but to know that I can encourage. Like that was just
which most people do.
Yeah.
I just want to say most people will avoid a grieving person.
Yeah.
They'll try to say anything else.
Yeah.
They'll talk about the Dodgers. They'll talk about the Lakers. They'll
Right.
talk about something else.
Right.
Politics, rather than have to go, how are you really doing?
Yeah.
And it's different day to day. I mean, when you're grieving, you have a good day and then you have a bad day. And there's no how are you doing overall. It's like,
Yeah.
well, how are you doing today? How was your today? Today was actually pretty good,
So
or today was really rough. I went to the grocery store and I saw those flowers that she always liked, and I'm crying in the middle of the grocery store. It's a rough day. You know?
But we need each other to be able to share and be present in what we're feeling, to have somebody there. And so I'm just grateful for all these tips. Honestly, it makes me, as much as I feel bad to say, like, excited with these skills, because I feel like I could just help myself and family members and just other people. And I hope other people feel empowered by these tools as well.
But first, you grieve.
Yes.
First, you
I'm going to
grieve.
revisit. I'm going
First,
to
you
revisit
grieve.
that. Yes.
You gotta lean in.
And I've been checking on myself. I just had marriage counseling right before this, and we talked about like how my wife, deals with my emotions, and I'm working on it. And you can hold me accountable.
I'm just saying, the only way you can help them is if you do it too,
right?
And you're in the process, because they're going to hear you much more if they can tell the depth in your heart, right? Because you've been there.
Man, okay. I guess this is gonna go a little. Ken, if you have to go though, let me know.
I don't have to go.
Okay.
Talk to me.
So, and we mentioned this. And my therapist pointed this out. Right, it's about it's really like the last weeks or so, like knowing that, hey, the options that we've been necessarily society's given us, and just like around norms and how we act, culturally, of like, when one person is crying, it doesn't mean that another person needs to be non-emotional. I'm strong for this person because I'm going to be here and I'm holding them up, and I'm being strong for this person that's crying, and just being told like, well, what if you were to cry too? And I was like, what? I never thought that was an option. Like, what if I cry? What if we're just both crying together? Maybe that would be beautiful. Maybe that would be like what's needed. And I guess knowing that, like, allowing yourself to be vulnerable to accept those things. And you touched on like what it would be like for somebody, right, that's grieving and crying, to have somebody that wasn't trying to be a stone,
It was very interesting, because when I was grieving, the people that had grieved deeply were the easiest ones to talk to. Why? Because they had been through it. And so they had a capacity to hear you and to just be there with you. Not to try to give you answers to get you out of it, not to try to make you feel good right away, but realizing that the sadness and the hurt is part of what you're going through, and just to be there with you as you're going through it, because you have to go through it. You know, with that physical therapy, you know, I can be there beside you as they're cranking on your knee or something like that. You're still going through the pain, and I'm just there with you. Man, you can do it. Come on. You know, but I'm not trying to get you out of the pain. I'm not trying to tell, oh, hey, stop doing that. It's like, no, this pain is important for Matt to get his knee going again. And I'm here to say, you know, here, let me wipe your brow a little bit, but you can do this. You can do this, because this is part of the healing, and you got to go through it. And it's not being apologetic about it or trying to distract them, or, you know, it's just, hey, this part of it is tough.
Yeah.
It's hard. It's going to challenge you. But you can do it. And as you do that, you're going to gain life back. And you're going to get to that place where you can talk about them, and you can rejoice and remember the fun times and the funny things that they would say, and just the you know, the personality of that person who's not gone, who God does have.
Yeah. That's beautiful. Well, Ken, I'm going to wrap it up there.
Okay.
Unless you have something else you want to share.
I don't think so.
Okay.
You never know.
I think we've shared a lot. Again, I'm hoping all of you, if you are going through a recent loss, I'm dearly sorry for whoever it is that you've lost, or someone's near, especially as the holidays are coming up. I hope that this wisdom that Ken has been so this is humbly shared, and just constantly willing to be on God's path and just direction of sharing with so many people. I just pray that you can lean into it, you can heal, you can be recovered, you can go through just a healing process, so that you can continue to love again and be there for the people around you, and that it's okay to go through it, as Ken has said over and over again, and that you find groups. Again, I'll be putting links in the comments below, in the description below, and just thank you, Ken, for giving us this.
You're welcome.
All right, y'all. Well,
okay.
Thank you.
If you've joined the club, well, it's okay. It's not one that you would have joined intentionally, but if you've joined the grieving club, then you know, my prayer for you is that you go through it, and that God deepens you and really strengthens you in the process, because, you know, as we grieve, we can get closer to God as we just go through this process with Him.
Amen.
Okay.
All right. Until the next one. Bye, everybody. Thanks
Bye.
for listening.